Let me tell you a story. In a galaxy far, far away. Wait, that's for some other time. This time, it's our own galaxy. Far, far in the future. This is not a story about spaceships, nor is it about empires and wars. It's about a more interesting question. A question so old that humanity has spent thousands of years trying to answer it. In the end, who wins? Long before humanity conquered the stars, people thought they already knew the answer. When Alexander stood at the edge of the known world, they thought they had found the winner. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon with his army, a new winner emerged. And when Napoleon marched across Europe, people found another winner. History pointed towards these men and said, "Look, there. This is greatness. This is victory." There was the answer. And yet, Alexander died, the great Macedonian Empire shattered. Then Caesar died, and his republic disappeared. Napoleon died, his victories vanished. The men still remained famous. Centuries passed. We enter into the world of fiction now. Humanity has left Earth behind and crossed the ocean of stars. It built nations larger than anything the ancient world could imagine. And somewhere among those stars emerged two men. One wanted to rule history, the other wanted to understand it. One believed a single extraordinary individual could guide humanity. The other believed humanity should never trust a single individual with that responsibility. One was Reinhard von Lohengramm, the conqueror of the known universe. The other was young Wen-li, the only man he could never defeat. And for a brief moment, it felt as though the universe itself had arranged a debate. A debate not through speeches, not through elections, but through fleets, through governments, revolutions, and war. At first glance, this anime, Legend of the Galactic Heroes, looks like a simple story about democracy versus dictatorship. It is tempting to stop there. Many people do. But I don't think that is what the show is actually about. Because before we can ask who won, we must ask a different question. How did they get to the place where they were? History loves to tell us that greatness is earned. Great men rise because they are talented, that winners deserve their victories. But history often leaves out an important detail, or maybe we tend to overlook it, in favor of romanticism. That important detail is fortune. History glosses over it and we ignore it, mainly because we want our heroes to be impeccable, elite in every aspect. We want to believe in the power of sheer hard work and talent, perhaps as an excuse towards our own goals. I'm not saying that talent and hard work are not important. I'm saying that for every successful hero, there are thousands buried in the pages of history who were equally talented and worked equally hard. For every Achilles, there was a Diomedes. For every Odysseus, there was an Ajax. And perhaps the question is not even talent. Perhaps the question is opportunity. History often asks, who was the greatest? A better question might be, who was given the opportunity to become great? How many brilliant generals died before they received a command? How many inventors never received funding? How many rulers never inherited a throne? And how many strategists never found a battlefield? Talent in this regard is common. Opportunity is rare. And when talent meets opportunity, history calls the result greatness. In our story, the conqueror, Reinhard, was brilliant. No one can deny that. But brilliance alone does not conquer galaxies. His fortune came in many forms. First came his sister, Anna Rose, then his best friend, Siegfried Kircheis, then Oberstein, then Mittermeier, Royenthal, Hildegard. History remembers Reinhardt's genius. History forgets the 1,000 accidents that allowed that genius to matter. Great men are talented. Great men are also very fortunate. History remembers talent but forgets luck. And history almost never remembers opportunity. And perhaps that is the first lie history tells. Because when we look closer, we discover that greatness is not merely the story of those who rise. It is also the story of those who pay the price. For every emperor, there is a friend buried beneath the throne. For every victory, there is a cemetery. For every famous ruler, there are thousands of forgotten names, countless soldiers, countless civilians. History remembers the crown, but forgets the shoulders that carry the weight of the crown. Legend of the Galactic Heroes, an OVA that came out in 1988 about a universe torn between two sides, a democratic alliance and a dictatorial dynasty. One of the greatest political war stories ever put to screen. After watching this show, I have never come across another piece of media that matched its message, neither in the quality of the story nor in the pacing. Yes, the animation is dated. Any modern show can surpass it visually. There is a remedy for that too. This glorious series has been remade and is still ongoing. If you want to witness its greatness in full HD, you can. Although I must warn you, the remake introduces pacing changes and small alterations that, in my opinion, make it the inferior version. Years later, while searching for something that could recreate the same feeling, I stumbled upon another anime. An anime that reignited the same excitement I felt when I first watched Legend of the Galactic Heroes. Nippon Sangoku. An alternate future Japan devastated by war, where three nations struggle to reunify the country beneath their own banners. The show is still airing, so I won't spend much time discussing it here. But one particular moment stayed with me. Because I was talking about history being a liar, right? Forgetting countless people who contributed to the victory of the famous few. But sometimes, history is even crueler. Sometimes we remember people incorrectly, because that's what we were told. There was a man in Nippon Sangoku named Hei Yayakichi, one of the most loyal men in his nation, a man who willingly sacrificed himself to preserve unity, a man who died so others could continue moving forward. But his reward was permanent infamy. Because of certain circumstances in the show, he was falsely accused of being a traitor. And so that happened. History would now remember him as a traitor. The truth was the opposite. That is when I started wondering, how many traitors were actually heroes? How many victors were actually cowards? How many winners were carried to the gates of victory by people we don't even know? We remember outcomes, but it is impossible to know the events exactly as they happened. And that leaves a lot of room for imagination. Perhaps the greatest thing a human being can do. See, history is not truth, and that realization changes everything. Because once we stop looking at history as a list of winners and losers, we begin noticing another pattern. The greatest enemy is rarely outside the gate. It is usually already inside. A Trojan horse, if you will. Empires do not collapse because barbarians arrive. Empires collapse because somebody opens the door. A corrupt politician, a jealous subordinate, an ambitious friend. These are usually the people involved in the fall of an empire. In the story, the Democratic Alliance struggled because of the greed, cowardice, and corruption of its own leaders, men like Job Trunicht. The Empire, on the other hand, struggled because of its internal rivalries, because of ambitions. Great leaders rarely lose to outsiders first. They are weakened from within. And even when they survive that, another problem emerges. Success. The biggest prize, yet often the nastiest headache. The thing every ruler wants, the thing every nation celebrates, the thing everyone believes will solve everything. But winning never solves the problem, it simply creates a new one. Conquer a nation, now govern it. Defeat an enemy, now manage an ally. Build an empire, now keep it together. Every victory comes with a new problem, and eventually, victory itself becomes the source of future conflict. The larger Reinhardt's empire became, the larger his admirals became. Mittermeier, Oriental, Mecklinger, Müller, each one at their peak controlled territories consisting entire planets, fleets and resources so vast that they were effectively rulers in their own right. This is not merely a problem in fiction, it is a problem history has encountered again and again. Alexander conquered the world. His generals inherited it because they were loyal to Alexander, not necessarily to each other and not to the empire. And when the ruler dies, the object of their loyalty dies with him. The empire remains, then the empire breaks. Alexander's empire shattered into successor kingdoms. Similarly, the Soviet Union fragmented because nations wanted to govern themselves. History repeats the pattern constantly, not because these states lacked strength, but because they became too dependent upon a single individual. And that is what fascinated me most about Reinhardt. His greatest achievement was also his greatest weakness. His empire depended on him. The admirals were loyal to him. The larger he became, the more irreplaceable he became. And irreplaceable people create fragile systems. The perfect example was Oscar von Reuenthal, one of the greatest admirals in the empire, a man trusted with the entire sector of a galaxy, a man powerful enough to govern worlds. Reinhardt's success had created subordinates so powerful that they could threaten the very empire that elevated them. The empire had become so vast that its greatest servants were beginning to resemble nations unto themselves. Reuenthal was not merely a rebellious admiral, he was the natural consequence of success. And this idea is not limited to Legend of the Galactic Heroes. In Nippon Sangoku, there exists another fascinating figure, Denki Taira, a man who technically serves an empire, yet possesses enough influence to challenge it. A man who manipulates emperors, influences governments, shapes the future of an entire nation. When a subordinate becomes powerful enough to rival the institution he serves, the balance begins to shift, and suddenly the greatest threat no longer comes from outside the walls, it comes from within them. Success creates power, power creates giants, and giants eventually begin casting shadows large enough to cover the empire itself. That brings me to another uncomfortable observation. Great men need great enemies. A climber needs a mountain, a conqueror needs a frontier. Reinhardt needed Yang. You can feel it throughout the series. The moment Yang dies, something changes. The victories continue, the empire still grows, but the energy disappears, the purpose disappears, because victory removes the very obstacle that once gave life meaning. And what happens after the final conquest? What happens after the final battle, when there is nothing left to overcome? Legend of the Galactic Heroes spends its final episodes wrestling with that question. Not answering it, literally wrestling with it. Because there is no answer. Perhaps that is why the ending feels so strange, unsatisfying, yet human. The heroes die, the villains die, the governments change, the flags change, The arguments continue and ordinary people continue living. Perhaps Albert Hubbard was right when he joked, "Don't take life too seriously. You will never get out of it alive." It sounds humorous, a little mortifying. Yet, after watching emperors conquer galaxies, admirals rebel against kingdoms, democracies collapse, dictators rise, and entire civilizations fight over the future, it becomes difficult not to see a grain of truth in it. Because when all of this is happening, people still move on. The farmer still plants his crops, the merchant still opens his shops, the child still grows up, and the student still shows up. History remembers battles, life remembers mornings. That was the realization that struck me hardest. Not that democracy won or dictatorship won. I was asking the wrong question all along. Who won? Reinhard? Yang? Julian maybe? No. Maybe nobody won, because winning was never the point. A man can conquer the universe and die 2 years later. A nation can survive but lose its soul. A rebellion can fail and still be remembered. Victory answers military questions, not human needs. And those are never the same answers. At the very end of the series, I found myself arriving at a strangely simple conclusion. There are no winners, only participants. Governments can come and go, empires rise and fall, great men rise and fall. Life continues. Who decides who is a hero? Who decides who is a traitor? And how many names buried beneath the weight of history deserve to have their stories told differently? And perhaps that is why the question itself remains beautiful. In the end, who wins?